two.
Hello, I'm Chris LaPlaca with ESPN, and we're here today with George Bodenheimer, the president of ESPN and ABC Sports and the co-chair of Disney Media Networks. And we're about to have a conversation for the Archive of American Television. It's November 1st, 2010. We're in George's New York City office, and we're happy to have you with us.
3, 2, cameras rolling.
Okay, well, let's get started, George, early. You can't get any earlier than this. We're going to get some biographical details out of the way before we get into the more meaty part of the conversation. So the first tough question, when were you born?
I was born on May 6th, 1958 in Meriden, Connecticut.
Meriden, Connecticut. Okay, and your name at birth was?
George Ward Bodenheimer.
Very good.
Same as it is today.
Same as it is today. Excellent. Who are your parents?
My parents are Julian and Vivian Bodenheimer.
And they both worked, I believe, correct?
Yes, my father was a retail store manager, department store manager, and my mother was a bank teller.
Very good. I know that family is important to you, and there's some lessons you've learned from them, which we're going to get into. George, do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a sister, Susan Trumbo.
She in the area still?
Yes, she lives with her husband and 3 sons in Cheshire, Connecticut.
So you guys are a close family. Everyone kind of stayed together. When you were a kid, was sports a big part of your life? Was it a big conversation in your household?
It was, I would say, more from a participatory standpoint. I mean, our whole lives as children revolved around sports. Went with the seasons, baseball, football, hockey, basketball, golf, tennis, boating were primarily, the sports that we all played, but it was a big part of my childhood and all of my friends.
Was it pickup games with kids in the neighborhood, or now it's all organized sports? Everything's so structured.
Well, I think it was a little of both. I mean, it was organized baseball, hockey, unorganized as well. When the rivers and ponds froze, played hockey on them, football games in the schoolyard, that sort of thing. So I'd say it's a combination.
So sports was a big part of your growing up from the time you were a kid.
It was, and all my friends were interested in it. We talked sports and played throughout our childhood.
Now, you ended up in sports television. So when you were a kid, did you watch a lot of TV?
I would say no more than your average kid. Of course, it was when we grew up. It was before cable television.
Right.
Being fortunate to grow up in southern Connecticut, we could get the New York stations. So we had, I don't know, half a dozen stations, which at the time seemed like a lot, and watched our share of sports certainly.
Did you remember the time when you had to get up to change the channel? Did you, or was there, right?
Oh,
you
yes.
Remember that, right?
Oh, I remember that. Remember that vividly. It seems like a long time ago now that was the case. But I remember that when we were growing up. It created a lot of inertia. Let's face it.
Well, no, I remember. I mean, there were 3 broadcast networks then, and if you started in the evening on any one of them, you probably had that viewer for the rest of the night.
Well, that was one of the beauties of the business that has since passed by, but I do recall it.
Do you remember having any favorite television shows as a kid?
I probably watched all the police shows, Adam 12 and Hawaii Five-0, which of course is back on now as a remake. I recall that vividly. Hill Street Blues was a favorite more later on in life. I remember watching the New York Rangers on Channel 9 in New York religiously throughout the winter. That was always a highlight. But I don't think I watched it any more or less than anybody else.
Okay. Bookham Dano. Did you and your friends go? That gentleman just died.
Yeah, I saw it was James MacArthur, I believe,
Yeah.
just passed last week. May he rest in peace. But it was a great series.
Absolutely.
I remember watching that with my dad on many occasions.
great. What high school did you attend?
Greenwich High School, Greenwich, Connecticut.
And did you play sports in high school, or what activities were you involved in?
I played on the golf team and was involved in a variety of extracurricular activities, but normal, student activities. I worked all through high school as well.
Oh, you did?
I did.
What did you do?
I worked on a golf course, and I also worked I used to call myself a petroleum transfer engineer, which meant that I pumped gas. But it was a great job, and a lot of my friends worked there, and we had a good time.
So you learned about serving people, I guess, at a young age then, right?
Yes, all businesses are service businesses. I tell my kids all the time, everybody's in sales. You have to present yourself and state what you're interested in, and try to deal effectively with people. And I always enjoyed that, and that was always a big part of. I enjoy people, and I enjoy being around them and dealing with people.
That carries through. College. Where did you attend college?
Denison University in Granville, Ohio.
How did a young man from Connecticut end up at Denison University?
Well, it wasn't too long a story. I mean, no one in my family had ever graduated from college before, so we didn't have a long list of, look at this, or mom or dad went to college here or there. We didn't have all that, so and in those days, Chris, and I've just been going through this with my own kids, you didn't apply to as many colleges back then as seemingly the kids do now. And someone close to our family went to Denison, touted it, and we put it on the list of 3 schools that I applied to, along with the University of Connecticut and Hobart College. And once I visited Denison, I really fell in love with it. It's like a piece of New England right in central Ohio, and I had a great experience there, and I enjoyed it greatly.
Now you have a son going there.
I do. My son George is a junior there now, and we just got back from a weekend out there. The school is thriving, and he's really enjoying himself out there.
People don't know this, but you're a part of a trivia question. What college did Michael Eisner, Steve Carell, and George Bodenheimer all attend?
Well, that would be Denison.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen.
Jennifer Garner as well.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Very good. A lot of folks who've done well in the entertainment television side of things. We mentioned you have a son. You have more children, and we should probably get into that part of your personal life as well.
I have a daughter, Kate. She's an aspiring actor, lives here in New York City, graduated from Syracuse University. And I have a son, James, who is a sophomore at Penn State University, studying communications, and enjoying going to Penn State very much.
And you met your wife, Ann, who's also from Connecticut, but she was in the business. You did not meet in Connecticut.
No, Ann and I only grew up about 12 miles apart, but we had never met, although we later, determined we had a few mutual acquaintances, but we never met. And I was at a cable television show, the Texas cable show in San Antonio, Texas in, I think, 1983. And I was introduced as, hey, meet someone else from Connecticut. And that's how Ann and I were introduced. I guess maybe we were the only 2 people, from Connecticut down at that show. It might have seemed like that anyway at the time. And that's where we met. And we got married about a year later.
Yeah, I just learned that the other day. I thought that was interesting. All right, so George, you graduate from Denison, 1981, correct?
Yes.
And
No, 1980.
1980. All right, excuse me. What was your plan? What did you wish to do at that point?
Well, my primary plan was to get a job. I was interested in some combination of sports and entertainment. I wrote a letter to every Major League Baseball team. I think there were 28 teams at the time. My letter basically said, you need me in your front office. And I got back 27 we don't think so's. And I got one interview out of that. Bill Giles, also a Denison graduate, one of the owners of the Philadelphia Phillies, asked me to come down for an interview. They had won the World Series that year in 1980, and was pleased to meet with Bill, appreciated his time and interest. It didn't result in a position at the time, but I learned through meeting with meeting with him, I learned about baseball and the opportunities in the front offices, and it was a valuable experience for me. I then turned my attention to some of the arenas like Madison Square Garden, Nassau Coliseum, New Orleans Superdome, Boston Garden. I thought that would be interesting, mix of sports and entertainment, political conventions, rock concerts, sporting events. I thought that would be an exciting profession. No real luck getting anything going there. Found it difficult to get interviews, frankly, and so that didn't come of much. And I went to see a friend of my dad's, Bud Lamoureux. Bud was a longtime producer at CBS. I wasn't really thinking television, but I was looking for work and meeting with anybody that I could, frankly, to get some direction. And he was probably the first person that ever mentioned ESPN to me. I'm quite certain we didn't have cable television at the time at our home, and he told me about this 24-hour sports startup in Connecticut, and he knew some folks, and he thought he could get me in to see the human resources director. So I don't know. A few weeks later, I wrote a letter or so, and through Bud's courtesy, I managed to get in to see the human resources director, and had a very short interview. Asked me if I'd mind shoveling snow, and he informed me that I'd be qualified to be a driver in the mailroom, which, as the name implies, was driving the mail around and driving executives to and from the airport, and basically moving whatever needed to be moved at ESPN. And he said, I might have a job for you, and if you're interested, let me know. We'll let you know in about a week. And I remember driving back the 70 miles from Bristol to Greenwich, thinking, gee, what am I going to tell my dad? I was kind of offered a position in the mailroom for a salary that was less than a year's tuition of Denison. We owed some college loans and all that. And he and I went out. We actually went out for a beer and a bowl of clam chowder at a famous restaurant in Coscob, Connecticut that no longer exists, the Clam Box, to talk it over. And during that evening there, when we went out for a beer, he gave me some of the best advice I've ever received. He said, if you think sports television is a field that you could be interested in earning a living, and if they call you and offer that job, you absolutely should take it, because you're making a career decision, not a money decision. Forget the title, forget the money, get your foot in the door kind of thinking. And so we agreed there that if I was offered that job, I would accept it. And I don't know, a week or 10 days later, I was about the 150th employee of ESPN, and I started in the mailroom and driving executives to and from, and it was a great place to start. But that's how it got underway.
It's pretty sage advice. There might be some parents, George, who would say, look, you got a lot of college loans. I didn't send you to 4 years of school so you could go deliver the mail, and there's nothing the matter with that. But so, I mean, I know you've mentioned that many times in the past. It's a heck of a moment, a singular moment in time, right? I mean, your life could have gone in a different direction had your dad had a different attitude. Do you ever think about that?
I don't really think much of what could have been had he given me the advice. I do think often about how fortunate I was to be the recipient of such great advice, because it's been nearly 30 years later now at ESPN. It's been a nice run, and the company has never stopped growing. It's been a wonderful place to work, and I've given that advice out, to plenty of young people who've sought advice from me over the years about what to do and how to get started. And I think it's the best advice I ever received. Mm-hmm. And you got to come to work every day, so you better be passionate. You better like what you do, because it's a way to stay motivated. And I certainly benefited from that advice.
You mentioned sports and entertainment seem like interesting things. What is for you to do? What about those things drew your interest, and why did you think about going into those fields when you graduated?
I'm not really certain, Chris. I enjoyed sports as a kid, as we talked about earlier, and I just thought the entertainment business would be fun. I was just attracted to it. It's, how does anybody know what they like and don't like? I just thought that would be interesting, and combining it with television, as we're fortunate enough to do here at ESPN, has been a wonderful experience and field to be involved in. We love, entertaining people here at ESPN and being a part of people's daily lives. It's a nice responsibility for all of us, and we love what we do. So I don't know what attracted me to it, but I love it.
Right. Well, that's clear. So you.
To cut for a second.
To approve this.
3, 2.
George, I happen to know this because I've heard you mention this before, but you should mention it again now. You showed up for your first day as a driver in the mailroom with a jacket and tie.
Yeah.
Expand upon that if you don't mind.
Well, at the risk of sounding like I was influenced overly by my dad, that was his advice. So he was on a roll, so I took his advice there too, and he thought that would be the proper thing to do. He's an old school guy, and I think it lasted maybe an hour or so before it came off, because it's just not moving boxes and carrying things around. It's not too conducive of a uniform, but I got my start that way, so I was very happy with that.
Now, you were asked to move a tree from one place to another into some place in the legal department, correct? And I know a few years ago you joked about you think that tree is still in the legal department. That might have been just a joke.
My first morning, again, consistent with the responsibilities of a driver and what roles you had, I was told I needed to move a tree from one office over to the legal department in another building. In those days, a lot of ESPN departments were shuffled around. The company was already starting to grow so fast, and so the legal department moved in another building, and one of the lawyer's trees apparently was left behind. So I was carrying a tree in a coat and tie through the legal department. I think it was my first day, and I remember getting a few cracks and comments about that, and the lawyer whose tree it was, Eric Kemmler, and I joked about it over the years. That tree, in fact, he recently retired,
Right.
and he gave me a branch or a snippet from that tree, which is still alive in my office in Bristol, Connecticut.
Is that right?
Yes, it is.
That's a great
So
story.
that's one
I
old
think.
tree.
That is one old tree. I did not know that. That's terrific. So, George, some of your duties at the time, you would drive people back and forth to the airport. Sometimes you'd pick up tapes, because we'll get into that in a little bit, but that's how we got a lot of our programming, was tapes coming in through FedEx and delivering the mail and whatnot. What else? Did that pretty much capture the job in the
Well,
early
the main
days?
job was the mail sweeps and driving executives to and from the airport, and then whatever odd jobs needed to be done. But the company was, in its early stages of growth, and literally just getting the mail around to the various departments. I believe we did 3 sweeps a day. We had multiple buildings, and just keeping all of that moving kept us busy. But I also believe there's opportunity in any job, and they are what you make of it. It was a fabulous opportunity, because delivering people's mail, you get to know them by name very quickly, because you have to do your job. And I really actually enjoyed it very much, meeting everybody and learning what they did, particularly when I drove people to the airport, executives, because once I had them in my car, unless they decided to walk, I had them for about 40 minutes, which was the length of time to drive up to the Bradley Airport, and I used to pepper them with, what do you do? What do you like about your job? Are there opportunities for young people in your area, that kind of thing. And I really wouldn't give that experience up for anything.
I know you've talked about that quite a bit. Dick Vitale makes a big deal about, George used to be my driver, now he's my boss. You guys have a nice run with that.
Well, Dick and I formed a friendship out of that. He called me his personal driver, so for that first year I picked him up regularly at the airport, and we struck up a friendship which lasts, today 30 years later. And he's been a wonderful person, not only to be friends with, but to be associated with professionally, does everything we could possibly ask for at ESPN. Has been a great emissary for college basketball, the company, the V Foundation for Cancer Research, all things that we're involved in. Dick's been a wonderful person to have with us at ESPN.
Do you remember the physical plant at the time, George? I mean, now if you come to Bristol, Connecticut, you see a dish farm, 30 satellite dishes, 16 buildings, nice campus green. At that time, not so much. Do you think back about that at all? Can you remember what that looked like when you first walked down to
Well,
the
I do.
offices?
I think when you and I first met, you were in a trailer.
I was.
The communications department was in a trailer at that point, and I remember a couple of buildings. We've always been short on parking. We've never our buildings, our physical space in those days had a hard time keeping up with our growth. It's just over the last few years that we've been able to really catch up to that. So I remember multiple people in offices. I mean, ESPN was never a fancy place. I think it's always been part of the culture that has helped drive this place. It was very workmanlike. Didn't need fancy offices. They didn't exist.
Right.
And people doubled up on desks. So it almost became, I think, a source of pride at ESPN. And always having a trailer on the property and having to step across a board so you don't step in a mud puddle, to get to a trailer. It became part of the, in effect, fun that we had building this company. And so I think the kind of struggle and the physical space has contributed greatly to the culture that has developed at ESPN, and I think we're proud of it.
People in those days used to say, Bristol, Connecticut, really? Why not New York, LA, Chicago, Atlanta was a burgeoning media hub? But I know you think that our location in those meager beginnings has really turned into a secret advantage of ours.
Well, I do. I mean, I think Bristol, Connecticut has been a great home, and the state of Connecticut overall has been a great home for ESPN. We have good, New England work ethic. I mean, ESPN's a hard-working place. I tell people all the time, if you want to come to work here, be prepared to work hard, because that's the culture of ESPN. And it was formed in those early days, as you well know. And I credit the people of ESPN for all of the success that we enjoy today. And it had its roots in bucolic Bristol, Connecticut.
Do you remember the scrap metal place across the street?
Yeah, I do.
It's crazy. I tell people now, when I joined the company and we were told cable was the future of television, I walk in, there's a scrap metal place across the street. Right about where our digital center is now, there was a cow pasture, and this was the future of TV. I think back to those days and think, wow, it's really come a long way in 31 years.
Yeah, I mean, we did have that end of the road to ourselves, and that end of town. There weren't too many businesses right around where we were, other than the ones you mentioned. And now it's built up quite a bit. We have 100+ acres there, but it's a nice place to be, and it's a nice place to raise a family.
Now, cable TV at that point was really, no one knew if it was going to make it. And you ended up being a sales guy selling cable TV in many parts of the country, but at the time you wasn't even in your home when you joined the company, in your parents' home. So the state of cable TV at the time was early. Did that cross your mind at all in terms of what am I doing, or you were just happy to get started?
No, I mean, yes, it was very early, but I think quickly on, while the ESPN business model needed to develop over time and took a number of years into the early and mid 80s, cable was starting to become a popular product, and cable is one of the few products in the United States that had its roots in the rural communities before it went to the cities because of the reception issues, right? I mean, cable. The original name for cable was CATV, Community Antenna Television, when it was literally an antenna put up in rural communities with wires to help people get better reception. That was the derivation of the business. So if you traveled to rural towns, as I did in my ensuing jobs after the mailroom, you could see that cable itself was a valuable and viable product, and that the ESPNs and the CNNs and the MTVs of the world that started to fill up those wires, if you will, we knew we had something going. We just didn't know what the business model was. But clearly there was a need and a desire for product.
Do you remember some of the programming we aired that you would pick up at the airport?
Yeah, I remember in those
Those
days, tape delay college football was arguably our number one product in the very early 1980s. Bill Rasmussen, our founder's foresight to do a deal with the NCAA, benefited us immediately. But that was the number one product we had, other than, of course, SportsCenter, which was our live studio product. But that, Australian rules football, top-ranked boxing, other NCAA events, I remember as the staples of ESPN back in the very early 1980s.
Now, you mentioned Australian rules football. We did a campaign. We were trying to teach people what the rules were, right? And I think it was an on-air campaign. If you really want to know the rules, send us a postcard. You know what story I'm leading to. You can pick it up from there.
Well, yes, we put up this graphic. If you want rules to Australian rules football, send us a postcard. And we received approximately 45,000 postcards. And the reason I know that, I was in the mailroom. And I had to lug them over to the marketing department or the communications department, I don't recall which at the time, for them to send a copy of the rules out to people. But I remember it vividly as one of the first kind of tangible responses we had that we were touching a nerve with sports fans. And that was a lot of postcards.
Right.
And there was people out there watching a game that was largely new to American television audiences who were catching on and interested in learning the rules. I mean, that was really one of the first signs we had that, we were hitting home to sports fans.
There was a lot of skepticism back then from people who were more entrenched in the industry about cable television, about the notion of a 24-hour sports network. But those of us who went to work there we were sports fans. We liked the product. We figured if we could get it in front of enough people, they would like it too, right? I mean, wasn't that kind of the feeling? Is that your recollection? We, small band of people, but we thought we might have been onto something. And obviously the Australian rules football example was maybe the best early one. But I mean, the sense of pride and we'll show you that we still kind of have today started then. Would you agree?
Yes, it was a real esprit de corps in the early days at ESPN. If it wasn't 100%, it was 99% of those of us who worked there were into sports, were enjoying it. I think most of us were pinching ourselves that we're getting a paycheck and being involved in sports, and in this case, sports television. And as we started to go to towns and cities and take our product out, or watch the postcards come in, or start to get reaction from people wanting to know where they could get ESPN. Remember, it wasn't well distributed then. We certainly had a feeling that we were starting to, touch a nerve of sports fans. Again, I think very clearly early on, we knew we had a product. The question was, what is the business model? And how do you make this work? And how do you improve your product? Remember, we were largely laughed at by the mainstream television industry. Why would anybody need 24-hour sports? What is this? It's a bunch of tape delay reruns, and you know all of the sarcastic comments that we were on the receiving end of.
Right.
But we did feel like we knew we had something that sports fans could enjoy, and I think that that's what developed into our whole mission of serving sports fans. That's what we do at ESPN, and those were the early roots of it.
Do you remember ESPN, short for Espanol? We were a Spanish network. We were STP. I mean, it was a big product at the time. We got caught up in that. People made fun. I mean,
we were Spanish Sports Network, or I remember there was one article and some people thought we were a headache powder. I mean, we've seen it all in the early days before the name was, meant what it means today. It was largely derided.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned paycheck. I a couple seconds ago. I remember before the days of direct deposit, we would hear rumors we weren't going to make it. We were going to be sold. Ted Turner maybe wanted to bring us to Atlanta. I remember going home talking to my wife and said, "What do you think about Atlanta as a place to live, just in case?" because there were all kinds of. But every Thursday when we get paid, you would see a line of people at the bank down the street making sure that paycheck didn't bounce. I don't know if you were ever in those lines. I know I was. Do you remember that?
I remember those days vividly. I mean, it seems like ancient history that you had to go and deposit your paycheck.
Right.
It seems back, along the lines of when you're talking about before you had a remote control for your television set. But yeah, I remember those days, and back then a good day was the day you got your paycheck.
Absolutely. Look, we should talk about the business model a little bit. It was advertising only, advertiser supported only. We had to sell ads to make money. Obviously, it shifted over time, but you mentioned it 2 or 3 times. We should probably get into it a little bit because that was the traditional model for television at the time, just selling ads, and we didn't have any ratings or anything along those lines. So we just really had a brand we were trying to build, right? I mean, that was part of the challenge that we had in the early days, I guess.
Yes, the initial business model was vast majority of the revenue would come from advertising, like every other television network that was out there, and our ratings were so low, and we were such an unknown business that that was a struggle from day one. We did secure a very nice commitment from Anheuser-Busch, who you've got to give credit for being one of the first companies to really support the vision of ESPN, and they signed on before ESPN was able to deliver, traditional media weight, if you will. So we owe a debt of gratitude to the Anheuser-Busch company early on. But really, what turned the company around was some work done by one of our earlier presidents, several of our then president Bill Grimes and our future president Roger Werner, who was at the time working for McKinsey and Company, and they developed a strategy where we were going to need to get a subscription fee from the cable operators to supplement our advertising revenue if this company was going to make it. And in those days, it wasn't clear it was going to make it. But as it turned out, that change in the business model is what changed the fortunes of ESPN and really paved the way for the cable network model that's thriving today in the business. And we went out and positioned the cable operators. If you like this product, we're going to need some sort of a subscription fee or contribution to supplement advertising, or we will not be able to afford, and we'll be out of business, and we won't be able to supply you with the kind of sports that are starting to pick up and be popular amongst your consumers. And to their credit, the cable industry recognized the value of an ESPN and largely agreed over a period of years to flip the model and begin paying a subscription fee, which has enabled both us and the cable industry to thrive.
Some of the early calling cards that helped us sell that point through was the NCAA basketball tournament. Those early on games had never been televised before. No one had ever seen them. And I remember motel in California one time said, yes, we have cable and ESPN. They put that up during the month of March because people couldn't get it at home or whatever. They'd go to the hotel and watch the basketball game. So I don't know, but had you begun to switch into the sales when that began to take place? Or we're going to get into that in a little bit, but that was a nice selling point for us. Some of that live programming was the only live programming we had early on.
Yeah, I joined the affiliate, was then known as the affiliate marketing, now known as affiliate sales and marketing department in the spring of 1982. And that was just as this new model was beginning to take hold. It was a little bit after that, but it was on the cusp of that. And product like the Final Four, the NCAA basketball tournament, the early rounds, as you mentioned, were exceedingly popular. No television network had ever televised the early rounds, and no one had ever televised early rounds like we did. We were taking you from venue to venue to venue to see these great finishes, and that turned out to be one of the early signature programs of ESPN that really struck a chord with fans. We were getting letters from firehouses, police departments, other organizations wanting to know where they could see ESPN. We're directing them to hotels that had ESPN. Again, this was long before cable was wired everywhere, but they wanted to see these events, and that really was one of the another early indication was that basketball tournament that ESPN was fulfilling a need. I remember all that very vividly.
You mentioned Roger Werner and Bill Grimes. We should go back a little bit, I think, George, and to the founder. You mentioned Bill Rasmussen a little bit earlier as well, and Chet Simmons and Scotty Connell, who came up to Bristol from NBC. Bill brought them on board, and Getty, our original owner, and gave us the direction that we needed. You knew all those gentlemen. Scotty and you, I know, had a history going back to when you were a kid. But talk a little bit, if you would, about their influence in the early days of the company.
Well, I think it's safe to say ESPN obviously wouldn't exist without our founder, Bill Rasmussen, and his vision for a 24-hour sports channel. And he is the founder of ESPN and certainly deserves all the credit for that vision. He also was instrumental in the early growth of ESPN, and by bringing in tried and true television executives led by Chet Simmons, our president, and Scotty Connell, our executive vice president of production and programming. I mean, Chet and Scotty were the pros, if you will, brought in from NBC in New York to really, get ESPN started. And both gentlemen are passed away now. God rest their souls. But ESPN certainly wouldn't be on the footing that it is today without the foundation laid by both Chet and Scotty. And Chet and his ability to acquire product and his scheduling acumen, and Scotty for putting it on the air and making it all work. And they were ESPN, in those early years.
Did you now Scotty was a Greenwich guy.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't you play hockey? Did he coach you in hockey? Did I remember that from some time ago?
Yeah, Scotty Connell and the entire Connell family, very well known in Greenwich, Connecticut. Scotty, beloved person, along with his wife Till. Big family. I went to school with a number of the Connells, Bruce and Kathy in particular, but they're a huge hockey family. Scotty, big hockey fan, which is an understatement. And so we were all involved in youth hockey with, group of us from Old Greenwich and Connecticut, Old Greenwich and Riverside. We used to play hockey on Saturdays, and Scotty was our coach when he was in town, and all the kids played, and he lived it, loved it, and a lot of fond memories around hockey and the whole Connell family.
It's just funny, when you were involved as a kid, no way it'd be colleagues at a burgeoning cable television network. I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, there would have been no way to predict that.
No, none whatsoever.
And it's a stretch calling us the colleagues. Appreciate you being polite. I mean, Scotty was running the place, and I was driving everybody around.
Yeah, but you know what, George? Those guys, both Chet and Scotty, for all they'd accomplished, they done everything there was to do in the industry. I never felt like I was just some kid to them. I really felt like both those, and Bill too, by the way, that they were happy to have us on the team, kind of a thing. I mean, that spirit was really interesting in the early days. I'm sure you had that same feeling.
Yes, I mean they are the original formers. If that's a word. Forming the ESPN culture, which was team oriented. We're all in this together. Everybody's got a role. Let's outwork everybody and do the best job we can. I mean, that's really how we view our culture today. And Bill, Chet, Scotty, Bill Grimes, Roger Werner, that's what they all stood for.
And thanks to you, we still stand for that. We could have gone any number of different directions, and I'm happy to, a lot of us have stayed there a long time for that same reason.
Also, as long as we're talking about the early days, it deserves, Stu Evey from Getty Oil certainly deserves ample credit for his role in guiding the Getty oil company into investing in ESPN in the first place, and Stu's roles in those early days were also critical in the formation of ESPN.
Well, I mean, we all know the stories now. I'm glad you raised that. I was about to. We were in the diversified operations budget of Getty. ESPN was, and we were in there with things like almonds and other things that they were involved in. And we weren't making a lot of money in the early days. And Stu had to stand up to his bosses and say, "Hey, I think there's some promise here. Let's hang out a little bit." And we all owe those gentlemen a great deal of gratitude. So I'm glad you raised that. Let's talk about culture a little bit. It's a big part of your message today. It began to be formed back then. How would you define the culture of ESPN, and how would you tie it back to those days?
Well, I think the culture of ESPN is really our strategic advantage. It's a very competitive business we're in. Sales go up and down. Ratings can fluctuate. You're not going to win every contract. It's just the nature of a competitive business. But our culture is something that we can control, and we talk about it often with our people. And it takes various forms, but I like to think of it as passionate, rewards risk-taking, can-do attitude, outwork others, always operate with integrity. ESPN's a place where you can make a mistake as long as it's an honest mistake. Those types of things, the little engine that could, outworking others. I mean, those are some of the themes that I like to espouse for the ESPN culture. I think they all are living and breathing. Respect for your coworkers, and passion about what we're doing here to serve sports fans. I mean, I think all of those things speak to our culture.
And we're readily abundant, back then. We talk about calling cards, George, and helping to sell the promise of the company and the network. The NFL draft in 1980 was one of those calling cards.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about Chet Simmons and his programming acumen. He went down and talked to Pete Rozelle and said, "We think this is a TV show." And you recall what Commissioner Rozelle said to him. "Are you crazy?" Yet it worked, right?
Well, I mean, to say it worked is an understatement, although I don't believe in too many overnight successes. And, 30 years later, it's working very well. But, I mean, the ratings for the draft rival that of a game. It's now a multi-night, multi-day and night deal, and the interest in it is huge. But ESPN and Chet and all of the people working at ESPN in those days deserve the credit for building what was in effect a business meeting into a television event, and one that continues to grow to this day. But yes, it absolutely was one of those events that was almost kind of nutty, but serving sports fans, whether it be the draft or televising the America's Cup when Dennis Conner went down to Australia to get the America's Cup back, or the early rounds of the NCAA tournament. Again, people had never thought to televise these things prior, and there certainly was no vehicle until you had a 24-hour sports vehicle. But these things have all turned out to be tremendously popular and helped put ESPN on the map.
So I agree, and we're going to get into the America's Cup because it really was, in 31 years, or maybe a handful of truly significant milestone moments in the company's history. I think that's one of them. We're going to get into that. Let's shift gears for a little bit and talk about you somewhat. You were in the mailroom, you were driving around, you were learning and whatnot. And then, I guess, based on your backseat interviews or conversations with executives, you thought that maybe the sales and marketing department would be an area that you'd be interested in going into. And lo and behold, we had an office in Dallas at the time. And there was a job opening in the affiliate marketing department in Dallas. And you went for it. Pick up the story from there.
Well, I had determined through talking with folks at ESPN that for me, I thought sales and marketing was the route that I'd be best suited for versus production and programming. And I then started to pursue any job in either sales or marketing. And a job came open. We called it our Dallas office, but ironically it was in Arlington, Texas. And a job came open there as an account executive, and where your job was to call on the cable systems in 5 states, Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And again, this is when cable was just starting to add product like ESPN. And So it was pretty early on, and greatly enhancing my opportunity to get the job. I was the only one in the company that applied for it, and I guess most of us, we were all having a good time working in Bristol. It was, seemed like everybody was 22 years old, and we were working our tails off, but having a great time. But I saw it as a real opportunity, and the company flew me down for an interview. I read half a dozen trade magazines on my flight down. I'm sure I didn't understand what I was reading, but I was trying to get some grasp as to what I was walking into, and apparently did sufficiently well enough in the interview where I was offered the job. And a couple weeks later, I moved down to Texas and started my work in the affiliate marketing area.
And what you would spend a lot of time in your car once you got there, trying to sell almost door to door our company and our network.
Yeah, it wasn't, I flew a lot, but also did a lot of driving as well in those 5 states. They're pretty spread out. But I was really going from town to town in those states, selling ESPN to cable operators, and shortly after that was when we were trying to convert that business model to, in the early days, we paid the cable operator. And then by the early 80s, we realized that business model wasn't going to be functional, so we were converting it to where we needed a subscription fee to survive. And that's really the cusp of when I first, my first year on the job was involved in that transition. But it was great. I'd never even seen those states, much less traveled from town to town. I tried to make 3 calls a day, morning, lunch, and afternoon. And so it required you to be organized, be able to move around, move quickly, stay on time, research who you're calling on, have the proper message, get your follow-up together, and move on. And it was a wonderful experience, just meeting all the cable operators, and in many cases local town officials that were interested in learning what was going on with ESPN. And it was quite an education. And you could see the early take-up of ESPN. The reaction we got often was, gee, I think this is a crazy idea, but if your company's gonna deliver us 24-hour sports, then we'll carry it on our cable system.
What was I remember you told this story once about the reaction you'd get from people. You'd say, here to sell a 24-hour sports network, and they would say what to you?
I mean, almost universally, I was informed that whatever town I was in was a sports town. George, Biloxi is a sports town. George, Waco is a sports town, and on throughout the Southwest. And I quickly realized that, every town in America literally considers themselves a sports town. And whether it's high school sports, college sports, or pro, and it varies depending on where you are, I mean, people are passionate about sports, and we had a company, ESPN, that was learning and beginning to tap into that passion, and it was really quite interesting to see, and it was rewarding. It was rewarding.
I have a theory. I've never asked you this. I'm going to ask you now. I think you can make an argument that sports as an entertainment genre is perhaps the most powerful because of the passion you just talked about. I mean, why do they riot? I don't condone riots, but after championships, the people run out into the streets, they're blowing horns, or people go crazy. You don't do that after you've seen a great play, and the great plays are terrific. But I mean, that's been kind of an unwritten benefit of ours, wouldn't you say, over the time, that the genre we're in just moves people in ways other entertainment genres don't, I think.
It's safe to say that people are passionate about sports, and we were often kind of derided as we're in a niche business. I think some of the traditional television players at the time considered us a niche, and what we've learned over the years is that if it's a niche, it's a very large niche because sports play a big role in society. To some level, they play an escape role. People enjoy the sanctuary of being involved in whatever sports they're interested in, and they're certainly passionate about it, as we see time and time again.
you were learning a lot about our company and about the business as you were traveling around in those regions. You're really the only president of our company, George, who's really did learn the company from the ground up. All the other folks who joined, and they were all terrific. The right leadership at the right time, you could genuinely argue. But having learned the company from the ground up in the way you did, do you tap into that as you go on in your current role?
Absolutely. I mean, I know that everybody in this company plays a significant role, and I know that from seeing it ground up. And we have nearly 7,000 employees here, and I believe each and every one of them can, and in many cases, the vast majority does play a role in the successful operation of ESPN. It's not about just who the leaders are, who the managers are, who the officers are. Yes, you need good management and good leadership, but you need good people who understand the mission of the company and are passionate about making ESPN the best place it can be, and I believe that's what fuels the success of ESPN.
Did you touch the content part of the business in those early days? I mean, you were trying to sell the company, sell the service, but did you also touch the content in some way? I mean, you had to know what we were. How did you get involved in that part of the business?
Well, I had my various short-lived stints assisting our production department in a few ill-fated attempts to assist in production, but fond memories. I used to stage manage once in a while, top-ranked boxing, a couple of hockey games here or there, pull a few cables at football games now and again, and really just because they were my friends. I may have been off in the marketing department, but when I'd be in town or an event would be where I was, I like to pitch in, and just seemed like the right thing to do, and I enjoyed it. It also reaffirmed my decision to head towards sales and marketing based on my skill level of assisting the production department. But I will tell you the best, other than really having to know your product to sell it, and I'd study the product and have watched a lot of ESPN, and I remember vividly being in these hotel rooms, really motel rooms in those early days, driving around the Southwest, studying at night what our product was so that I could do a good job that next day representing it. So that was my earliest real recollection, to answer your question, of studying what it is I'm selling and what is on the air and exactly what we're delivering. But if you fast forward ahead to 1993, when we launched ESPN2, and probably the 18 months leading up to that, I was very involved with what was ESPN2 going to be, so that we could do an efficient job of selling it. And our executive overseeing sales and marketing at the time, John Lack, really deserves a lot of credit for helping form the early vision of what ESPN2's programming strategy was and is, along with our then president Steve Bornstein. But I was very closely involved with them, heading up the sales operation of having to go out and try to sell our vision of ESPN2.
I remember some of the stories you told about pulling the cables and whatnot, and from that I think there's something you sometimes say to when you speak to employees of the company about if it's our hours are 9 to 6. Those are the remnants of the early days when Getty was our owner and they were on the West Coast. And you'll often tell the story, if you're walking out of the office and the phone is ringing at 6 o'clock and it's not your desk, you pick up the phone. I mean, that I guess that came from those early days of you're helping to pull the cables and do whatever else.
I mean, yeah, that was the early days of ESPN. I mean, again, not a hierarchical place, not a fancy place with all the managers' offices here and everybody there. It was just a building where the business was growing and we were trying to produce a product and sell it and do whatever we had to do to keep moving on, so to speak. So that was kind of my vision or my remembrance, my recollection, I should say, of the early days. If the phone was ringing, it was really kind of nobody's phone. It was ESPN's phone, and if it was ringing, you answered it. And it could be a fellow employee, could be a viewer wanting to know why you moved to PKA full contact karate or Australian rules football or what have you, and you help them and and you did the best you could. It wasn't, well, that's not my job. That I never felt like that was ever the culture of ESPN. Well, that's not my job. Your job is to help the company, and if the person on the end of the phone needs help, you help.
Right. George, I want to, before we shift focus, you mentioned the launch of ESPN2, and then we're going to get into that a little bit. But you moved around the country, quite a bit. Dallas, Chicago, Denver, Bristol, New York, now New York and Bristol. Not everybody played that game. Why did you do it?
Well, I was interested in moving up. I had, I was really enjoying being in the affiliate marketing department, and I was happy to accept a transfer on a couple of occasions where it was tied with a promotion and more responsibility. So my wife was blessed with a fantastic wife who was happy to move, and we enjoyed all those areas of the country we were in, whether it was Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Bristol on a couple of occasions. I mean, we've enjoyed that aspect of moving around. It was easier with the kids are young and all that, so it was an easy decision.
I mean, you couldn't trade that experience now, right, in your current role at the company. I mean, to look back and having really learned it day to day, every location we had, essentially.
Certainly, working out in the regional offices, you get a feel for what it's like, and we have, I don't know, 20-25% of our employees who don't work in Bristol, so they're getting a different experience. So I think it was a very valuable experience to have.
Shifting gears again to some of those early days, Saturday Night Live, often another icon in our industry, would do funny skits poking fun at us. They were hilarious. Did you think that helped build our brand, or what was your reaction to that? Because I'm sure people commented every time you would walk into another person's office.
Oh, I think it absolutely helped us, whether it was Saturday Night Live or Johnny Carson. I mean, when you start to become part of the conversation in the United States is when you become fodder for skits on those programs, and you start to get embedded into the culture of the United States. So it was undoubtedly good for us. And having parts in movies where people are taking off on ESPN or the Ocho, that kind of thing, in dodgeball. I mean, I think all that is tremendously valuable. It's been fun. And ESPN's always been about fun. It's been a big part of what we've been about all these years. Sports should be fun, and we like to laugh at ourselves too. I don't think taking yourself too seriously is a good thing.
We didn't have a lot of science behind what we were selling then. We had the fact that people were passionate about sports. We had these kind of cultural references. We had the notion that we were new and we were one of the building blocks, really, of the industry. There were MTV, CNN, us, maybe a few others you put in there that really were pillars. So I guess that had to help you, all those kinds of things. Lacking science, cultural references, and anecdotes, really what you walked in with, right?
Yeah, and I think, again, your gut instinct and passion for what we're doing, I think, was a large part of what ESPN had going. It wasn't filled with surveys and research results. It was kind of our guts, as our gut instincts as to what would be popular, and that we knew there was plenty of sports fans out there, and so I think it was more, just a feeling, knowing we were onto something.
So probably around about the mid-'80s, you had been at this for a while. Things seemed to calm down a little bit. There was interest in us from other large corporations, to purchase a part of ESPN. Was it around then, George, that you got the feeling that, all right, we're going to be here a while? You could see things beginning to turn a little bit?
Yeah, certainly by the mid-'80s, we started to gain in strength, and cable was really looking for programming. Cable television was beginning to really get its legs, and ESPN was becoming one of the stalwarts of cable television. So certainly by the mid, to the latter part of the '80s, this company gained strength considerably, and there wasn't a question by then that it was going to be at least a modest success.